Good evening. Welcome to another edition of Ziggy'S World. And tonight I'm going to be interviewing MSP Liz Smith. Good evening, Liz. How are you?
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me back on the programme. I enjoyed it a lot the last time, so looking forward to tonight as well.
Great. So we'll start with we'll touch on first the MATHESON fiasco that we've seen in Parliament. And I'd like your views on, first of all, on what happened and the 63 abstentions from the SNP. It seemed really bizarre that they would put an amendment in and then all of them abstain from the vote.
Well,
how do you see it?
I have to say, I think the whole situation is quite extraordinary, actually. In all my 18 years in the Parliament, I don't think I've actually ever seen anything quite like this. I mean, I think it's actually a very, very sad situation for the Parliament because, here is somebody who has quite clearly breached all the rules that you could possibly think of and just doesn't seem to be able to accept just how the public feel. And I'm judging this from the feedback that we get from the public rather than from colleagues in the Parliament. Because, I think the last poll I saw was 65% of people in Scotland feel very strongly that Michael Matheson should resign. And I completely understand how that should be. But even more bizarre was yesterday's performance where the SNP agreed a successful amendment to the motion. And then when the motion was amended, they then voted against it, which I just found absolutely bizarre. And I think most people in the Parliament, certainly any journalists that were around, I think they found it very bizarre as well.
Yeah, 63 abstentions. It just does. I don't think, like you say, I don't think I've ever seen that before. It was quite. But one thing that I keep getting asked is, did Matheson actually vote for abstain from the vote, or he wasn't allowed to vote, was he?
No, but I mean, I think in this case, the bizarre nature of it is that the SNP were very keen to amend the motion and were successful in that attempt. But then when it was amended, they voted to abstain. Therefore, they wouldn't support it. And, even today at First Minister's questions, when Douglas Ross and Anna Sarwar were pressing John Swinney on this, it's all very well saying he's going to accept the ruling of Parliament, but what does he actually feel about it himself? Because that's what I think people are asking. Is the First Minister going to continue to support somebody who quite clearly has lost the trust of the public in the way that's happened? That's what I find rather disturbing.
I had Murdo Fraser on couple of weeks ago on my channel, and we were talking about doing something with Parliament, redoing after 25 years, redoing the processes of Parliament. Do you think this shows that Parliament is not working and it needs reformed?
Yes, I don't think it's just an issue that has brought this to light. I mean, I took part in the Holyrood Sources event on 25 years of devolution. And I think, if I watch what's happened in my time in Holyrood, I think there are lots of things that we need to address. And one of them is the aspect of scrutiny, which I want to come on to a wee bit later when we're talking in terms of the Eljamel situation, that the scrutiny in the Parliament is not as good as it should be. And I don't think Holyrood is working as well as it should be. Because the vast majority of people in Scotland, they want to see the UK government, the Scottish government and local government all working together to address the problems that they have in their local communities and nationally when it comes to education and health and transport and the economy, etc. And at the moment, I don't really think Holyrood is doing a good enough job on this. So Murdo was quite right, and I heard that programme when he's arguing very strongly, as was my colleague Donald Cameron before he left to accept his peerage, that there are fundamental things that need to change in the Parliament. I would like to see personally the election of committee conveners, because it was supposed to be that the committee system was the scrutiny, that was what was going to be really good about the committee system. I don't think that's measured up in the way that Donald Dewar, when he instigated devolution all 25 years ago, envisaged. I don't think we're doing our job effectively. I mean, I'm very privileged to sit on the Finance Committee, which I think I have to say, and all credit to Kenny Gibson, SNP chair, and to my colleagues. I think that's a committee that works really well because we've got quite a collegiate aspect of the way we deliberate and question witnesses. But of course, most committees have conveners who are chosen by their political parties because of the proportional representation system to represent that committee. And I don't think that's effective. And that's one big difference I think there is between the Westminster Parliament and the Holyrood Parliament. And I would like to see us going for elections, because if you are somebody who is widely respected across the political spectrum, irrespective of what your political views are, then I think you ought to be able to put yourself forward as a potential convener for your colleagues, to vote on.
Yeah. We'll move on to the. You just mentioned the Eljamel inquiry that's going to be happening. How do you? Because I know from previously speaking to you on the Spaces and speaking with Jules that you've been instrumental from the very beginning in helping Jules with a campaign in Parliament. How do you see it?
I continue to do everything that I possibly can to support the former patients of Eljamel. I mean, I don't think any of us who are not one of these patients or somebody who's related to them can imagine exactly what it has been like. I mean, I am horrified and continue to be horrified by what they have to go through, both from a physical and a psychological dimension. I mean, I think it's unbelievable. In fact, you cannot believe what has happened. And I'm very pleased that we should be getting to the stage where there not only is there an independent inquiry into what happened in terms of the process, but also to the clinical reviews. And I know there's been a little bit of a delay there, which must be very difficult for a lot of the former patients to accept that there is that delay. But I was very pleased when Professor Wigmore and Lord Weir were appointed, because I think they're absolutely the right people. These are serious people who know what they're doing. They've got the expertise, and Jules welcomed that very strongly on behalf of the patients at the time. We obviously want to see that progress. But the other issue here, which I think is very relevant to what I've just been saying about the committee system, is that one of the things that the Finance Committee is currently investigating is the issue about commissioners in Scotland. Now, presently we have 7 different commissioners. We have, for example, the Information Commissioner, we have the Standards Commissioner, the Ethics Commissioner, Children and Young People, etc. And we, not long ago, voted to have a Patient Safety Commissioner. Now, I was very much in favour of that because, the Eljamel situation is a classic case where the system, if you like to call it that, has failed. It's failed the patients, but it's also failed those who have been trying to do a decent job within an institution where there's obviously been a serious problem. And I think a patient commissioner is very important. But at the same time, we've got a difficult decision to make in the Finance Committee about whether we continue to have more and more commissioners, because there's proposals to have another 6, which would take it to 14. We're already on £18 million for that bill. Are we going to have that doubling in the future? Because I think what's really interesting just now is, and this came about because of the Patient Safety Commissioner, the demand for the commissioners is increasing because too many aspects of public services are failing. And that's exactly what happened in the Eljamel situation, whether it was NHS Tayside, whether it was the Scottish Government, whether it was the health and safety agencies. They all failed to address the concerns of the patients, and that's not yet been resolved. So I think that's an important consideration, because what happened in Eljamel, just like, you could argue this about the blood scandal and Horizon with the post office. These are things where there has been very significant failure within the delivery of public services, and somebody has to be held accountable. And as yet, that's not happened with the Eljamel situation, which is what I desperately want to see. And I know I speak on behalf of the patients for that.
Yeah, there's one thing you touched on there was the one-on-one reviews. Now, I do know, talking to Jules and some of the others involved, that as you say, it's been delayed, and I think they're getting quite frustrated with the process and the delays in that part. Is there, how what's your feeling about that?
Well, I mean, I would, if I was one of the former patients, I would be frustrated as well, because it is a delay. I mean, let's be honest, and many of these patients have been waiting years for action. And I think for a lot of the former patients, it's the clinical review that matters just as much as the actual independent inquiry, because the clinical reviews should, and I'm sure they will be, investigating the individual circumstances, medical circumstances of that particular patient. And I think there are complications in that, and I can understand why there has been a little bit of a delay, but I think it's imperative that the patients are told when to expect action on that, because that's only right and proper. And I have got every faith in Professor Wigmore as somebody who has got the clinical and judicial experience to be able to investigate this. But I think we want to know when it's starting and how that's going to progress. So, I understand the frustration of...
It's the communication, isn't it? It's the communication between that and the patients. Yeah. I think if they knew, well, yes, it's delayed because of X, Y, Z, and this is why it's having to be delayed, and there was better communication, then I think it wouldn't be as fractious as what it is on that part, because I think the actual inquiry, they understand that's going to take time to set up and to get ready in that.
Well, it is. It's a lengthy thing, and it has to be done properly. I mean, that's very important. But you're right, it is a communication thing, and I happen to know that I think the current Health Secretary, Neil Gray, I think he genuinely understands the frustrations and the difficulties that many former patients are facing. But I think he needs to take the lead on ensuring that this process, obviously it has to be independent, but it has to start, and that there has to be effective communication for the patients who are involved. But at the same time, just as important is the independent inquiry into the processes, because that's where an awful lot of things went wrong. And I will fight all I possibly can, and I know some of my colleagues in Parliament will do exactly the same. We want answers about why this was allowed to happen, who was responsible for it, and why were they never held to account, when it's quite clear that some people at the time had very considerable reservations about Eljamel, and in some cases actually knew some of the facts, which I think, when they are fully uncovered, will really spill the beans on who knew what when, because these are the answers that we desperately need to find.
What would you like to see come out of this at the end? What would you like to see?
I want to see I mean, we're never going to be able to ensure that the patients themselves can have a better life in terms of the disabilities and the psychological strains, and on their families as well. I mean, sadly for some of them, it is so severe that we're never going to be able to give them the life that they should never have lost. But I hope what it can do, and I, having spoken to a lot of the former patients, they want justice. They want to know why this happened and who was responsible, and they particularly want an accountability. They want to see the people responsible for this absolute, untold and unmitigated disaster. They want to see them held to account, and so do I, because we're never going to be able to move forward on lots of other things unless that happens. And if it takes a patient safety commissioner in the future to stop this kind of thing happening again, so be it. But for me, I want to see the Eljamel situation addressed properly after, as I say, so many years, and that these patients can at least get some peace of mind that in the end result, they know what happened, why it happened, and who was responsible.
Me personally, I when I talked to Jules, and that, I think for me personally, I'd like to know who covered this up and why it was covered up for so long, and that when that how do I put it? I'd like I'd like to see something put in place at the end of this, so it never ever happens again in Scotland or even in the UK. And if something comes out where we never see this again, that to me is not a bad outcome.
That's definitely part of the result. And I think, as I said, when it comes to the infected blood scandal, which is horrific as well, we have got to a situation, I think, both north and south of the border, when this kind of thing happens far too often. Therefore, health boards are not really held accountable for the problem, and they should be. So I think you're right. We have to have something at the end of this that ensures that this can never happen again. But that doesn't take away from the fact that those patients from Eljamel, they want answers about the particular situation that happened to them individually, and from NHS Tayside and the Scottish Government.
Yeah, that's that's. I think we all want that, and I do know Jules is really thankful for everything you've done to help from the very beginning, because you were one of the ones that MSPs that helped from the very beginning, before it all became public. And
I wouldn't be honest with myself if I didn't do my job properly as an MSP representing constituents. It's my job to look after constituents, and in this situation, it's the longest piece of casework I've ever had in my 18 years. But I won't let it go until we get the justice that these patients deserve. And I'm very grateful to colleagues across the political spectrum now who understand that this is not just this is nothing to do with party politics at all. This is about the system of, as you say, people lacking in accountability, and we have to sort this, because who would have trust in the health service if this kind of thing is allowed to happen?
Do you think this could be one of the biggest scandals to come out of not just Scotland but the UK?
Yes, I do. I mean, I've been actually over the period that I've been involved in this, that there's an increasing level of interest from UK media about this particular issue, and I've certainly done interviews on UK media as well as Scottish media about it, and I'm not surprised, because it is absolutely scandalous what happened.
I believe it was in hospitals in England as well, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I mean, the facts that we have, and I don't want to breach confidentiality on any public airing, but I mean, I've seen a lot of the facts from 5 or 6 different patients, and it's horrific what's happened. I mean, the files that I have on this are so extensive that they take up, a very considerable part of my office. And a lot of it is due to the fact that of all the letters that we've written in the engagement, we never got the answers that we were seeking. We got answers, but they weren't the ones that we were seeking. And so we had to write again, and it's this ongoing, and I know Jules and some of the other patients would say exactly the same, that it's this constant desire to get to the truth, but we have to put in so much effort to get somebody to understand what the question is that we're asking, and to give us a proper answer, rather than just to push it from pillar to post, which I think's happened a lot. The accountability line has been sadly lacking. And so, that's a big message to come out of the whole scandal.
Yeah, yeah, and I know when Jules first contacted me on Twitter and said, "Could you help by just retweeting my tweets and
Yep.
mentioning it?" Went on Twitter and that, and I thought when someone contacts me like that, I always do a bit of research and find out what they're wanting help with, and I was quite shocked that because I'm quite active in politics and in Scottish politics, and ashamedly, I never knew anything about this. I had no idea whatsoever until Jules contacted me, and when I start looking into it, I thought, why is the why is the media not interested in this? Because they didn't seem to be until it kind of really kicked in. I think when Theresa Mallet,
Yes.
when she went to Humza in the hall and she called him out, that seemed to be when the media kind of kicked off big with this, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And credit to the campaigners who've done a phenomenal job in raising this, and credit to yourself, because I mean, I was on your program before when we talked about this, and after that program, I was contacted quite a bit by people who obviously been listening in. And it's always very helpful to MSPs to get the relevant feedback from discussions like this. And last time, I got a lot of feedback on the whole issue. So, it's like, I think the more you can do on whether it's social media or a podcast like this, it helps a lot to give the former patients some sort of knowledge that they're not alone. We might share their frustrations, but we're trying our best to resolve matters.
Yeah. I think that does help the likes of Jules and that, because to quite honestly, I don't know where she gets her energy from, because every day, and she works, but
I know. Yep.
She's campaigning for tirelessly for this to come to get the conclusion that they want, and I do hope, and I do think now, with the likes of yourself and others, and plenty of others now, and the media, I do think we are going to get to the bottom of this, and I do think they're going to get the answers that they want, because it has to happen. It really does have to.
I think it will happen. The question at the moment is the time factor, and we don't want too many more delays. It will happen. I'm pretty confident, and one of the reasons I was very pleased when the Scottish Government was eventually forced into a U-turn into having to have an independent inquiry. I was relieved at the time, because I think an independent inquiry which allows people to give evidence on oath, they can't get away from it. I hope that independent inquiry, and I'm sure it will call as evidence people who were involved at the time. And some of the people at that time have got a lot of questions to answer, and they're not going to be able to escape providing these answers, because they will be called to give evidence.
Yeah. We'll move on to what is happening right now. Now we are in, and I'm really thankful that you can come on the show, because we are now in the general election mode.
We are indeed.
It's when politicians like yourself really kick into gear, don't you? When it comes this next 6 weeks.
Yes, it is. But actually, I would argue quite strongly that our most important job, not just during election time, it's during how we serve our constituents year in, year round. So yes, we do kick in, and we become very political about, obviously, trying to sell what the manifesto will say and whatever. But actually, the most important job of being an MSP is actually looking after your constituents.
Do you? Because I do get what I meant by saying that is, I do find with politicians, when it comes to like election time and the general election or the Holyrood election, they thrive on that time. They really love the campaigning, the knocking on doors, the battle to get this. Is that how you see it? Do you really love this kind of?
Yes, I do. Of course you do. You've got a duty, obviously, to present the case at the time of any election. But there's an outside world there as well, and those of us who are politicians, I think it helps us to have an outside life as well. So I'm afraid I'm not somebody who will be completely sold on politics on every hour of every day, because I think engaging with people on other issues, in my case, a lot of my outdoor activity or sporting activity, you meet people in a different scenario, and I think that's actually very helpful to inform your political views. So yes, it's all, of course, we kick in for a very intensive period during the election, but you should never forget that the world is a bigger place than just politics.
Yeah.
And that's important, actually, always to remember that, and to remember who sends us into politics. We're only there because we're elected. And that's important, because people have got lots of things they want us to deal with out with an election.
So how do you see this general election as it stands, as it's going forward? How do you?
Well, I think it's actually a very interesting general election. I'm going to try to take the politics out of it for a minute, the party politics out of it for a minute, which I know is not easy. But just to stand back, I mean, I've been watching the polls over a long period of time, and I think everybody jumps on a single poll that comes out, whatever. What I like to look at is what the trend is over several months of the polling. And I think that, the Conservative Party, UK Conservative Party, has not been having a good time, because obviously the polls have been significantly against them. And I think that as time has moved on, I think there's a bit of a closure in the gap. I think that the Conservatives quite clearly have not been popular for a variety of different reasons. That's not uncommon in terms of the time that they have been in office. But I think there are other factors at play there as well. And I think that the interesting scenario here is that in Scotland, there's a very different dynamic where different factors, different policy factors, are playing into the general election in a way that's not happening down south. I think there are almost two different elections happening. And obviously the Conservative Party fortunes in Scotland, ironically, are very much better at the moment than they have been down south. And it's usually the other way round. But it's not just now. And that's partly because I think the SNP have, very clearly, over a consistent number of polls, it's pretty clear that they are struggling to maintain that grip that they've had, that very tight grip that they've had on Scottish politics for such a long time. And so there's an opportunity in different seats for the Conservatives to do pretty well. And so I think it'll be a very interesting dynamic, because obviously the Labour Party is resurgent in Scotland, but I think that's largely a central belt factor. So I think, on course, if the trends of the polls are to believe, the Labour Party will probably do pretty well in the central belt, SNP less well. But I think out in the rural constituencies, I think there's a very interesting dynamic to be played out there.
Yeah, the way I've seen it so far is it seems to be two different elections. One, obviously, for the UK to put in a government in the UK, but in Scotland it seems to be very, very different, because it's a chance that we've not seen for a long, long time of actually not getting rid of, but voting out the SNP and sending a very clear message that their time is up.
But I think I think they're actually doing quite a good job of that themselves, because I think one of the reasons why the SNP is struggling just now is because their record in Holyrood has proven to be pretty difficult for them, whether that's in the delivery of public services. If you listen to business and industry in Scotland, they are very worried indeed about the high tax level that the SNP is promoting, and particularly the differential in tax rates between Scotland and the UK. Because if you listen to a lot of businesses that are trying to attract people to come to Scotland for sort of medium to high earning jobs, they're finding recruitment pretty difficult. because people are worried about the extra costs that entails. But I also think that, you know, in recent the last year or so, we've had a lot of bad law at Holyrood, whether that's been gender recognition issue, the hate crime, the deposit return scheme. You know, Holyrood has not been seen to be working very well. No. And then that's on top of very lengthy waiting lists and declining educational standards. So I think the SNP has had a real problem with that, and they're not able through an economic channel to persuade terribly many people that independence would actually work. I think there's quite a lot of people in Scotland who still support independence, but largely from a sort of emotional and social angle. When it comes to the economy, it's a different issue. I think people recognise that the SNP is struggling to persuade enough of Scotland that they know exactly what would happen to the currency, to pensions, to defence, to our borders. You know, there's a lot of really, really big economic issues, which I think are, you know, not flying very well for a lot of people in Scotland.
The number of people that even come into our spaces or I've talked to who are independent supporters, and the number of times they say, well, I support independence and I only voted for the SNP because of independence, because they were the only independence party. But now we realise they are not going to get us independence. The Supreme Court case absolutely shut that down completely, and I think that was a huge thing. I think that started the cracks in the SNP forming was that. Now, and they're saying, well, if we're not going to get independence, we then start to look at how the SNP have formed and performed, and the country is in an absolute mess. We are really, really in a you know, a huge mess at the moment, and they're thinking, well, my life's nowhere near as good as it should be, and I'm not getting independence. I am not going to vote for the SNP. But a lot of them are saying, but I won't vote for anybody else, so I just won't vote.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important point you raise, because certainly I think the message on the doorstep from quite a lot of people is that they're pretty fed up with politics generally. I think a lot of people are fed up with the UK government, they're fed up with the Scottish government, and as you say, they are pretty tempted not to vote because they're, you know, they don't really. I think the real problem is they're not actually voting for something positively. They're trying to be voting against something, and that's never a very healthy aspect of any democratic electorate. You want people to be supporting political parties because they genuinely believe that they're going to deliver what is the right approach for, you know, their particular lives and their family. And I think we're in a difficult situation in UK politics as well as Scottish politics. So I think politics has lost its integrity.
How do you get that? How do you get them?
Well, that is a very good, but it's also a very difficult question. We have to try to get back the integrity that politics once had to a much higher degree than it does just now. And I have various views on this, but I think it's about the integrity of the members of any particular parliament. And we've seen a lot of cases in Westminster where, and my party is as much to blame as any other party, where politicians have not behaved with the integrity that we expect, and that includes some party leaders. We've seen people who have not abided by the code of conduct in the way that the public has absolutely right to expect. We've obviously had this in Scotland, particularly in the MATHESON issue that you asked me about earlier. It personifies that problem. And I think an awful lot of people in the voting public think, you know, we're all in it for ourselves, and there's one rule for us and one rule for them. And that's not a healthy angle. I don't think social media helps. I think because of social media, which is so instantaneous, people make a judgment very quickly without stopping to think about what they're actually saying. And sometimes people make huge gaffes on social media. And, the toxicity that has brought to the sort of political discourse, I think, is deeply unfortunate and very difficult for people to accept. Because, if I look back on my time, when I first came into the Scottish Parliament back in 2007, it wasn't a divisive parliament. It wasn't toxic. Yes, we had our political differences very strong, but we got on reasonably well with each other, and we were trying to deliver what was in the best interests of Scotland. As time has progressed, particularly since 2014 in the Scottish referendum, and then with the Brexit referendum in 2016, whatever your views are on either side of both these, it's become very toxic and divisive. And, the Constitution seems to dominate absolutely everything. And I don't think that's what the priority of most people in Scotland actually is. They want their potholes fixed. They want their bins collected. They want good education for their child. They want to be able to get a dental or a GP appointment when they ask for one. That's not happening in the way that it should be. So I think it's partly us. We've got to take responsibility for how we behave and what we try to do on behalf of our constituents. But I think the body politic has got to look at how best it can get back to effective scrutiny and accountability, which is what we've been discussing with Eljamel, and people accept the responsibility. And if you make mistakes, which we all do in politics or in life generally, you've got to hold out your hand and say, look, I've got this wrong. I've made a mistake here. I'm very sorry about this. What can we do to sort it out? I mean, how often do you hear that? Not very often.
No. What frustrates me, especially in Scotland, is in Parliament, is when we get First Minister questions, and especially any question from a Conservative MSP like yourself and Murdo and others. All we hear from the First Minister is, "I'll take no lessons from a Tory." Or like today he said, was it to Stephen Kerr, the brass neck, without answering the question that was put to him, it just turns around and says, "Oh, the brass neck of the Tories. That's what we get from them." And then he doesn't answer the question.
Yeah.
And he stood there when he became First Minister and said, "I want to do politics a different way, where Parliament comes together and we are civil to each other and that." But then he does the complete opposite.
Yep.
It does, and I think that's where people get really, really frustrated when they watch that.
I quite agree. I think it's hypocritical to say that you're going to work together across the political divide and then to turn on people simply because they represent a particular political party that's not your own. I don't just blame the SNP for this. I think this is something that happens in other political parties too. Yeah. But that is not what the public wants to hear. And, whether it's Prime Minister's questions or First Minister's questions, that's a bit of political theatre. It's not where the real hard work of politics is done. Because that happens, or should happen, in committees. It should happen when you're engaging with your constituents. And I think politics can be, when it's in the sort of media eye, it can be very sort of superficial, and people are always playing to a soundbite rather than to what actually I think matters to people on the ground.
Yeah, but it's as I see it, the divide between the general public and politicians is because of what we see, not behind the scenes, but what we actually watch.
And it's very presidential now. It really matters from anybody who's leading a political party now, anywhere actually. It's not just in Britain. It happens abroad too. It's a presidential style. It's all about the presentation of that particular person, rather than necessarily about the policies that they want to present or the political beliefs that they have. I think that's probably quite a problem as well.
Yeah. Well, that's been a really interesting chat, Liz. I think I've really enjoyed it, and
good.
Good luck with the campaigning. I do think myself. I don't know how you see it, but I do think the Conservatives, especially just talking about the Conservatives, I do think from what I can see that you're going to keep at least the 6 seats, and you may even add another 2 or 3 on top of that.
I hope so, because I mean that's, you know, if you look at the polls over a period of time, and I think if you listen to the likes of Professor John Curtis when he's explaining as a psephologist what's happening, you know, I think there's a good chance of that. But we have to fight for every vote, and I do believe very firmly that we have to define ourselves what we stand for rather than just what we stand against.
What do you think of tactical voting?
Well, I think, you know, this gets to the nub of what I've just said. I mean, I like to think that people are voting for you because you represent something that they want to see you deliver and is in tune with their own political beliefs. Tactical voting, of course, can be very important, and it can certainly deliver results in a very different way, because tactical voting is usually because you want to keep somebody out. It's usually against something rather than for something. And obviously, I think tactical voting in Scotland will be pretty crucial this time. In fact, I was looking at what is it, Scotland in Union, I think, and also some of the Alaba party analysis, whereby they're recommending which seats you should, you know, vote for a different political party in order, in some cases, to keep the Tories out and to keep the SNP or whatever. So yes, I mean, I think tactical voting is increasingly important, particularly in a proportional representation system. But I much prefer where people are voting for individual candidates because they actually believe that that candidate is going to deliver something that they believe is in tune with their best interests.
Yeah. Well, good luck. Good luck to your party, because I do know I'm lucky. I'm a Conservative voter, and I have we're a Conservative area, so I agree with you. I think he's the best person for my area. Oliver Mundell, I think he's great.
Very good constituency.
Yeah, he's always welcome. He's always opening to talk to. If you want to phone him, he's always available. So yeah, that's so I'm very lucky in that side. So good luck, and thank you so much for coming on. It's really appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I hope to speak again soon.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Now. That's my show over for today. Please, as usual, plenty of likes because it helps with the show. Subscribe, share, and leave your comments. If you've got any questions for Liz, send us your questions. I'll pass them on. Send us your comments of what you think, of what you've heard. I read them all, so please send your comments. But until next time, thank you for listening, and take care.
Thanks.